Long before the name Onitsha was mentioned on the east bank of the Niger, the ancestors of the people who would become the Onitsha lived in the Niger-Benue confluence region. Linguists labeled their ancient speech West Benue Congo. Its later offspring include Proto-Yoruba, Proto-Edo, and Proto-Igbo. In that savanna riverine environment, perhaps more than 1,000 years ago, they learned to smelt iron, forge tools, and organize river-borne trade that reached the Sahel and indirectly the Mediterranean. Population growth, warfare, and the quest for new farmland pushed splinter groups southward. One such splinter, heavily influenced by the militaristic culture of medieval Benin, established a cluster of settlements known in oral tradition as Ado Naidu. Ado is an ancient word for Edo, while Idu is a historic name for Benin Kingdom. So Onitsha Adonaidu means Onitsha people of Edo and Idu origin. They paid tribute to the Oba of Benin, adopted Benin titles such as Iyase and Olugbo, and worshipped at a shrine called Udo. By the late 15th century, Benin's expansion under Oba Isige, 1504 to 1550, collided with Adonaidu autonomy. The flashpoint was when Isigia's queen mother, Idia, was allegedly slighted by Chima's men, prompting Isigia's refusal to perform the customary cow sacrifice at the Udo shrine. War started afterwards, and the Adonaidu elite, led by the charismatic healer warrior Eze Chima, fled rather than fight a hopeless war. While moving east, they paused at places like Onitsha Uku, Onitsha Olona, Onitsha Ugbo, before reaching the west bank of the Niger opposite the present city site. As Echima himself died there, tradition says his corpse was ferried across at night so that his spirit could possess the new land. His son Orezie finally led the crossing, assisted by Igala ferrymen who knew the river's treacherous sandbanks. On the east bank, they named their new home Onitshan Mili, meaning Onitsha on the water, to distinguish it from earlier halting places. The date is uncertain, but most scholars bracket the founding between 1630 and 1680 CE. Archaeologically, this coincides with the appearance on the east bank of pottery decorated with Benin-style guilloche patterns and of burial goods hinting at a ranked society. So, from the very beginning, Onitsha identity was forged in movement, a river crossing, a royal exodus, a conscious transplantation of Bini ritual and Igbo speech into a new ecological niche where the Niger, the Anambra tributary, and annual floodplains offered both protection and commercial opportunity. By 1700, the settlers had fused into 9 royal villages, grouped in 3 ritual wards. Executive power lay with the Obi, a divine king who could not be seen eating in public and whose coronation required a symbolic journey to Benin to collect fire. Around him sat a council of titled war chiefs, Ndiozo, Ndinze, Iyase, and Olugbu, whose offices combined military command with ritual duties such as leading the Ofala and presiding over the Agwe, royal ancestral cult. The Onitsha army was essentially naval, war canoes, some 60 feet long, crewed by slaves and free men, armed with Dane guns obtained from the Delta middlemen. With these flotillas, Onitsha levied tolls on the river traffic, raided Igala settlements upriver, and protected the salt-producing ponds. Downriver, they exchanged slaves, ivory, and palm oil for European textiles, firearms, and manillas through the Itsekiri port of Guatu. Internally, the kingdom was a mosaic of royal, commoner, and immigrant quarters. Igala fishermen at Ogbudu and Obigboro became assimilated. Eastern Igbo refugees fleeing Aro slavers Goat, Obonike, and Oze wards and paid tribute in labor and yams. Intermarriage created bilingual households, yet social distance was preserved by sumptuary rules. Only royalty could wear coral okuru beads or own certain masquerades, such as the Ogonogo tall ghost. Commerce transformed gender roles. Men disdained petty trading. They farmed yam, the prestige crop, and fought. Women, many of them related to royal lineages, controlled the river markets. They formed Omu, Queen Mother associations, negotiated with European supercargoes, and on occasion blockaded the river by withdrawing labor. The 18th century prosperity is still visible in the massive hardwood pillars of early Obi Palace halls and in the Portuguese cannon mounted at Ugu Oroli as symbols of sovereignty. Yet danger loomed. Aro expeditions penetrated the hinterland. Abo, a rival riverine power, fielded larger fleets, and Benin, though distant, still claimed sovereignty. Onitsha responded by tightening internal cohesion. Every adult male belonged to an age grade, Otto, responsible for palace labor, road repair, and in wartime naval conscription. So, long before formal European annexation, Onitsha had evolved into a mini-empire whose wealth derived from controlling the choke point where the Niger narrows and from mediating between the Atlantic demand for captives and the interior supply of war prisoners. The first white men came not with Maxim guns but with Bibles. In July 1857, the Church Missionary Society boat Dayspring, carrying the Yoruba ex-slave Bishop Samuel Ajayi Crowther and the Igbo catechist John Taylor, anchored off Otu Onitsha. Crowther's tactic was to convert the King Obi Akazua first. Akazua refused baptism but allowed a mission compound on the waterfront. By 1866, ex-slaves from Sierra Leone, settled as Omobeke, white man's children, built Victorian-style houses along what is now New Market Road. Roman Catholics followed in 1888, acquiring land at Ogbuli and introducing the first Irish nuns. The rivalry produced the earliest Igbo Bible and the first Catholic Catechism, both printed on a press that still stands in Holy Trinity Cathedral. Commerce changed just as fast. The 1861 Anglo-Bonny Treaty diverted most Delta traffic to British firms. Onitsha middlemen found themselves selling not slaves but palm kernels. By 1880, Miller Brothers and the Royal Niger Company had warehouses, a wharf, and a customs post. The Obi's revenue, once counted in sleeves, now came from import duties and canoe licenses.
Political subjugation followed economic penetration. In 1884, Onitsha was declared part of the Oil Rivers Protectorate. In 1900, it became the headquarters of Onitsha Province within the Southern Nigeria Protectorate. A British district officer resided at Uzala, built the first iron bridge across Nkisi Stream, 1906, and laid out the American quarters. The indigenous Otu age grades were co-opted into road-building gangs. The Ozo Council was told to advise, but not to veto, colonial ordinances. Resistance took subtle forms. When the government imposed a hot tax in 1908, Onitsha women responded by refusing to cook for their titled husbands until the levy was reduced. The Omu, being the female counterpart to the Obi, led market closures that paralyzed kennel exports for 3 weeks. Eventually, the tax rates were lowered, and Onitsha was allowed to keep its monopolistic Umunwoke Ferry Guild. Thus, the early colonial period ended with an uneasy condominium. Union Jacks flew over the wharf, but palace drums still proclaimed the Ofala every October, and masquerades still enforced night curfew in the inland town. The 1914 amalgamation of Nigeria turned Onitsha into the gateway for the entire eastern region. Igbo laborers from the Nsukka and Akwa uplands poured in. By 1931, strangers outnumbered the original 3,300 in Onitsha, 3-1. Hausa stevedoes settled at Ogbe Hausa, Nupe carpenters at Amanupe, and its Sekiri palmware brokers at Ogbaijao. Each quarter flew its own flag, green for Igbo, red for Hausa, white for its Sekiri, creating a cosmopolitan waterside that never slept. Colonial modernization was visible. Tarred roads 1919, electric streetlights 1927, and the famous Asaba Onitsha ferry, a 200-ton paddleboat that could carry 600 passengers and 30 lorries in a single trip. Central School, Catholic Christ the King College, and Dennis Memorial Grammar School produced the first Igbo graduates. Their old boys, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, Dr. Akanu Ibiam, and Chief Mbazulike Amechi, would dominate nationalist politics. World War II brought boom and bust. Onitsha became a staging post for Allied convoys heading to the Middle East. Local contractors made fortunes supplying yams and palm oil to the army. But inflation also bred crime, and the famous Onitsha Main Market, formally opened in 1930, had to establish its own tribal police to curb smuggling. The 1950s witnessed the rise of the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, the NCNC, whose Onitsha branch, led by Chief Charles Abiodun Doherty, mobilized market women to fund Zig's campaigns. Independence, 1 October 1960, was celebrated with a flotilla of decorated canoes and the symbolic release of 1,000 white pigeons at Uguarori. Yet the good times were short-lived. The 1966 pogrom saw thousands of Eastern Igbo refugees flood into Onitsha, bringing tales of massacre in the north. When Biafra seceded in May 1967, Onitsha became a strategic prize. Its bridge, opened only the previous year, was the sole road link between Biafra and the Midwest. Federal troops captured the city in March 1968 after a bloody house-to-house battle that destroyed the inland town palace and most of Ogbe-Otu. The occupation authorities created a buffer zone along the river. Civilians were headed into camps at Nkpo and Obunike. Starvation followed. Daily ration was 1 cup of cornmeal for each adult. By January 1970, when the war ended, Onitsha's population had fallen from 350,000 to barely 120,000, and its famous main market was a ghost of charred iron roofs. Yet, as will be seen, the city's ability to reinvent itself had not been lost. Reconstruction began amid marginalization. The 20-pound policy refunded war savings at a flat rate, and indigenization decrees barred Igbos from key industries, fueling resentment. The East Central State government, headed by Mr. Ukpa Biasika, offered tax holidays to any trader who rebuilt within 12 months. The response was phenomenal. By 1973, 3,000 lock-off shops had risen on the old market site. By 1977, daily turnover exceeded pre-war levels. The secret was the apprenticeship system. Ex-Biafran soldiers became Noah boy errand boys to wealthy Oga merchants. After 5 years, they were settled with a carton of shirts or a bill of lace to start their own stalls. Thus emerged the Onitsha International Trade Fair, launched in 1981, and the legendary Boys Company millionaires of the 1980s. Structural adjustment in the mid-1980s devalued the naira and made imported goods prohibitively expensive. Onitsha traders responded by switching to Chinese suppliers and Dubai re-exports. The city became the conduit through which second-hand clothes, okrika, motorcycle spare parts, and later electronics flowed into the entire West African hinterland. The population rebounded to an estimated 1.5 million by 1991, creating new suburbs, Fege, Okboko, Wuliwo, and stretching municipal services beyond breaking point. In 2000, the Bakassi Boys, a vigilante group originating from the market, patrolled the streets with machetes and mystical oaths, reducing crime but also accused of extrajudicial killings. Infrastructure lagged behind commerce. The old single-lane Niger Bridge, designed for 2,000 vehicles a day, was carrying 20,000 by 2005. Tailbacks stretched 20 kilometers to Asaba. After decades of agitation, construction of the second Niger Bridge finally began in 2018 and was commissioned in 2022, complete with toll plazas and pedestrian walkways. Culturally, Onitsha has reasserted its uniqueness. The annual Ofala Festival, revived in 1973 by Obi of Onitsha, now attracts diaspora tourists from Europe and America. The Iriji ceremony, New Yam, is broadcast live on Anambra Broadcasting Series. The Igbo Language Research Center at Nnamdi Azikiwe University codifies the Onitsha dialect, ensuring that the distinctive nasalized tones of the Onitsha are not swallowed by the surging tide of Central Igbo. Economically, the city is diversifying. The Niger River port is being dredged to accommodate 5,000-ton barge convoys that will link the Anambra River to Lokoja railhead, thereby reducing dependence on congested Lagos ports. A new Onitsha business park, complete with dry docks, cold rooms, and a textile mill, is under construction at Obunike. Meanwhile, the sons and daughters of the city who once hawked on the streets now own banks, airlines, and telecom licenses. From a 17th century refugee camp through a 19th century mission beachhead via a 20th century war zone, Onitsha has become a 21st century commercial behemoth. Its story is not merely Igbo history. It is the story of how African communities absorb defeat, exploit opportunity, and above all, keep crossing new rivers, literal and metaphorical, in search of brighter shores.